If you ever get the chance to visit the vast metropolis of New Shanghai, be sure to look out for the unusually high number of missing person signs scattered throughout the towering skyscrapers and labyrinthine neon alleyways. The city is big enough that if you don't see one, it's probably not there. But if you do, then make sure to avoid the obvious traps set up by the city's many gangs and organized crime groups. Now, this was a tall order. Even though the walls had been crumbling away for decades, there wasn't any easy way to get inside. After scouting the perimeter, our hero found a weak point at the back of the building. The bricks here had fallen away to reveal a gaping hole in the wall. He made them to house the minds of criminals and other unsavory types who paid him to take their consciousnesses and store them for safekeeping. And our hero figured that it probably hadn't made it very far from its creation chamber. To make sure, he reached out and pressed the button on the back of its neck. It didn't respond, but then it suddenly lunged forward and sank its teeth into his arm. Then he would bind their minds to the nearest available body and send them off into the world. As far as anyone could tell, he did this purely for his own amusement. After all, she was still a ruthless killer. But in this situation, our hero had two things that made it possible. The Rat King had designed this system with security in mind, and as soon as our hero tried to access it, alarms started blaring. The walls of the room began to close in, cutting off any hope of escape. And several Rat King robots armed with plasma rifles came charging toward him. First, he was a compatible host because he had a cyberdeck implanted in his brain. It allowed him to interface directly with the Matrix. Then everything went black. When our hero woke up, he found himself lying on the floor. His head throbbed, and he could feel bits of shrapnel digging into his flesh. But the pain was worth it. He had just saved a life. The Rat King, he took my cyberdeck. Alice nodded grimly. Then we both owe you our lives. Come on, she said. We have to get out of here before the building collapses. And second, the Rat King had already done most of the work. It was a risky plan, but if it worked, she would finally be able to destroy the Rat King once and for all. Unfortunately, it hadn't worked. The Rat King had sensed her betrayal and transferred her mind to a doll just in time. Besides, I kind of liked having a crazy woman's mind inside my head. It added a little spice to life. I owe you my life. No one believed her story, so she was forced to go underground. That's where she met the Rat King. He had captured her and offered her a choice, either become one of his dolls or help him create more of them. Their footsteps echoed in the empty street, a promise of vengeance. She chose the latter, but she soon became disillusioned with her new master and began plotting against him. She stood up and brushed the dirt off her clothes. What about yours? She asked. The sun was just beginning to rise, and the city was slowly waking up. As they walked, Alice explained what had happened to her and why she had become so obsessed with hunting down Rat King dolls. In fact, he had created a fail-safe system that allowed him to transfer a mind into a compatible cyberdeck at will. He accessed the core and began overriding the system. The process was agonizing. It was like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. But with a surge of adrenaline, our hero forced his way in. All he had to do was access the system and override it. Our hero knew that he couldn't keep her mind trapped inside this doll, but he also couldn't just let her go. After all, he had just brought her back from the dead. Why did you save me? She asked. You didn't know me. I was a stranger to you. If he did, she would probably end up dead. Their programming was outdated, and their weapons weren't very powerful. Within seconds, our hero had dispatched all of them and turned his attention back to the console. So he decided that the best course of action would be to transfer her mind to his own body. He squeezed through the opening and found himself in a dark and dusty courtyard. Then he returned to the abandoned building and began working on the doll. It took a while to remove all the damaged flesh, but eventually he was able to access the network port on the back of its skull. He hooked up his neural reader and scanned the contents of the doll's mind. He had to transfer Alice's mind before the Rat King returned. But every time he tried to access the system, he was met with another roadblock. The Rat King had anticipated this and prepared for it. He had placed a large number of traps on the system. And each time our hero bypassed one, two more would appear in its place. Because believe me, no good ever comes from those. With a sigh of relief, our hero pulled out his multi-tool and began slicing away at the restraints, holding the limbs in place. So he went back to his date and told her that he needed to use the car to get some supplies. She asked if everything was okay, but he lied and said that he would explain later. It took our hero quite a while to sift through the memories and put the pieces together, but slowly he learned the identity of his victim. Her name was Alice. She had been a police captain who specialized in tracking down Rat King dolls. Unfortunately, she had become obsessed with her mission and had alienated herself from everyone she loved. Her husband had left her, and her daughter was in foster care. She had no one left who cared about her. The harder he worked, the more the doll's eyes seemed to glow, and he could feel an evil intelligence watching him from inside. Our story begins with an unknown protagonist who was taking the long way home because he wanted to show his date the most expensive residential tower in all of New Shanghai. The couple were making their way down one of the many narrow side streets when they heard a noise coming from an abandoned building across the road. It sounded like someone screaming in pain, and although it was probably just some street rats fighting over scraps, our hero felt compelled to investigate. He brought his date back to the car and parked around the block before sneaking back to the abandoned building. They were wide open and unblinking, staring blankly into the middle distance. Our hero knew that this wasn't some freak accident or the work of some particularly sadistic gang. This was the work of the Rat King, an insane hermit who lived deep within the bowels of the city and used whatever body parts he could find to create these twisted abominations. A single ray of sunlight cut through the gloom and landed right on something sitting in the middle of the courtyard. It was small enough that at first our hero thought it was just a doll or a robot left behind by one of the gangs. But as he got closer, he could see that it was actually a human child. Well, a human child in name only. In reality, it was some kind of grotesque parody of a child. Its skin had been flayed away to expose the metal endoskeleton beneath, and what remained of its flesh was twisted and mangled. But the most disturbing thing about this poor creature was its eyes. The Rat King didn't just make these dolls for fun, however. This particular doll had been activated and left to wander the city on its own. Our hero stumbled back and raised his knee, connecting with the doll's face. The creature hit the ground hard and stayed there. He finished cutting the ropes and reached out to check for a pulse. There wasn't one? He drove to a medical clinic and bought some basic medical equipment. It was clear from the chaotic jumble of thoughts that this was the mind of an insane man. When the Rat King took her mind, it was actually a mercy killing. But that didn't mean that she wasn't still dangerous. Now, normally, this wouldn't be possible. The process of transferring a mind requires a compatible host body and a lot of expensive equipment. Of course, that wasn't going to be easy. With a grunt, our hero drew his energy sword and charged into the fray. The robots weren't much of a challenge. There was no time to lose. Finally, with only seconds left before the self-destruct activated, our hero broke through. The last thing he remembered was the look on Alice's face as her mind flooded into his. Well, maybe two. He looked over and saw Alice kneeling beside him. Her eyes were filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He touched his neck and felt the implant beneath. "I think it's gone," he replied. They made their way out of the abandoned building and into the safety of the street. She had once been a promising young officer, but after a botched raid on a Rat King facility, she had been suspended and dishonorably discharged. That's when she discovered the failsafe system. As they walked, Our hero listened patiently. He knew that he owed Alice an explanation of his own. He shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I just didn't want to see another innocent life wasted." He paused and looked her in the eyes. Alice laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Very funny. So what now?" "Now," he said with a grin, "we hunt down the Rat King and end his pathetic life." And so our heroes made their way down the street, two figures silhouetted against the rising sun.